We're going to start talking about a bunch of different properties and laws, and so it's going to possibly get a little bit confusing. So for these first three, I saw something that I think might help, which is RST123. And it can help us remember the first letter of the first three laws we're going to talk about. The first is reflexive, and it has to deal with one thing. Then we have symmetric, which deals with two things, and transitive, which deals with three. So RST123. So the first thing we're going to look at is the reflexive property. And what the reflexive property means is that anything is equal or congruent to itself. Anything is equal to itself. So for instance, we can use the equals or congruent symbol. If I have the segment AB, it's equal to AB. It's literally just equal to itself. Or I can say it with congruent, which I think we've talked about, but congruent is like the equals with the tilde over the equals. So I might have XY is congruent to XY. So we can use equals or congruence. Anything is equal to itself. So that's RST1, 2, 3. Reflexive means one thing is congruent to itself. So S is 2. We can switch basically the sides of the equals or the congruent symbol. So it's when two things are equal, you can reverse the sides. For instance, if segment AB, that's a B, is congruent to segment CD, I can just switch the sides, then CD is congruent to AB. T is 3, so transitive kind of cuts out the middle to form a new statement. So we'll just write it like that. That's not really a formal definition, but cuts out the middle to make a new statement. For instance, if angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, and angle 2 is congruent to angle 3, then what do you think? Basically, we cut out this middle part, and angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. That's called the transitive property. Next, we have something that sounds big and scary, but is actually not horrible, which is called the law of detachment. And what this means is that if the hypothesis, and these are the conditionals that we've been talking about in class, if the hypothesis is true, then the conclusion is true. So for instance, the example that we did in the original notes was if it is raining, then the ground is wet. So the law of detachment takes that and adds another statement. It says, it is raining. The law of detachment says, since I know if it rains, the ground is wet, and you tell me it's raining, what can I conclude? I can conclude that the ground is, in fact, wet. So it's when you take your conditional and you say, okay, the hypothesis is true, so now that means I know that the conclusion, the ground is wet, can be made. The conclusion is true. The law of syllogism is basically like the transitive property, but with the if-then statements, the conditionals. So it does the same sort of thing. So if we use the example, if it is cold, then it snows. If it snows, then it sticks. If you notice, my conclusion in the first is the same as my hypothesis in the second. So what you can do is then basically loop the two together and have the hypothesis of the first, if it is cold, then, and I'm going to add snow, then the snow sticks. For those of you who liked the letters that we talked about with this stuff, we can write that as a syllogism as if P then Q, and then our second statement is if Q then R. So my conclusion would be take away the Q's, if P then R. So we can just skip over that part. Once again, it's like the transitive property, but with conditional if-then statements. That's it. Make sure to snap a picture and turn it into Google Classroom.